Hey guys, welcome to the 80th C programming tutorial, and in this tutorial we're going to be writing our very own swap function. So the swap function that we write is just going to be able to swap the value of two integer variables, and then once we write that function we're going to be making the function generic so that it can swap the value of any variables. So it can swap the value of fraction structs, longs, characters, anything. So first we're just going to be writing a regular swap function that'll swap the value of these two integer variables right here. So after we call the swap function on these two variables, the value of num1 will be 5 and the value of num2 will be 3. So let's talk a little bit about how we're going to implement this function. So right here we just have two integer variables. We have num1 and num2. So the first thing that we're going to do is just create a temporary variable. So we're going to say temp right here. And we're just going to set temp equal to the value of the first variable right here. So we're going to say temp equals num1. And then after we do that, we're just going to copy the value of num2 into num1. So we're going to say num1 equals num2. So after we do this, num1 will become 5. So let me just erase this right here. And num1 will become 5. And right now, both num1 and num2 have the value 5, but temp is still set equal to 3. So temp is equal to 3 right here. So now what we need to do is just copy the value from temp into num2. So we're going to say num2 equals temp. And after we do this, the values are swapped. So now num2 is equal to 3. And that's all there is to it for just swapping the value of two integer variables. So this is just all we need to do. So we're just going to write a simple function right now. So we're going to say void swap, since we don't have to return anything, and it's just going to take the address of two integers. So int pointer a and int pointer b. So the first thing that we need to do is just create a temporary variable to store the value of the first parameter. So we're going to say int temp equals a dereferenced. So remember, dereferencing is just going to the address stored in this pointer and then copying the value into temp. Alright, and then we're just going to say a dereferenced equals b dereferenced. And then lastly, we're just going to say b dereferenced equals temp. So there we go. That's all there is to the swap function. So we're just taking the value pointed to by a and copying it into temp. And then we're taking the value pointed to by b and copying that into the value pointed to by a. And lastly, we're taking the value in temp and copying it to the memory pointed to by b. So now if we just test this out right here, so if we just say swap on num1 and num2, it should just swap their values. So we'll just go ahead and print out a before and print out an after to make sure that it works. So we'll say printf before num1 equals the value of num1, and then num2 equals the value of num2. So just right here, num1 comma num2. Alright, and then we'll do the exact same thing for after. So I'll just change this to after right here. Alright, so before, num1 should be equal to 3 and num2 should be 5. And then after we call the swap function, so after we swap their values, num1 should be 5 and num2 should be 3. So we just swap their values. Run this, and yep, worked perfectly. Alright, so now for the more difficult thing. We're going to be swapping the value of anything. We can swap the value of fraction structs or long. So we need to make a generic version of this function. So first, let's just focus on the function prototype. We know that it's going to return nothing, and we'll just call this generic swap. There's the easy part. Now we need to set up the parameters. So we have no idea what we're going to be swapping the value of, so we need to use a generic pointer. So we're just going to say void star a and void star b. But we cannot leave it at just that because we have no idea the size of these things that are being pointed to by a and b. So lastly, we just need a parameter that tells us how big each one of these things are. So we're going to say size t and then just size. Alright, so there is our function prototype. And we're actually going to be swapping the value of two fractions. So we're just going to go ahead right here and create a fraction struct real quick. So type define a struct called fraction. and it just has two fields, numerator and denominator. Alright, so we'll just go ahead right here and create two fractions. So we'll say fraction fract1 equals 1/2, and then we'll say fraction frac2 just equals 3/4. And before, I think I actually had it called fract. Alright, so all that we want to do is just swap the value of these two fractions right here. And in order to do that, we're just going to be calling the generic swap function. So we're just going to swap them using the generic swap function. So generic swap, and we're just passing through frac1 and fract2, and then we need to pass through the size of a fraction. So just size of fraction. But we obviously can't test it yet since we haven't even written the code for generic swap. So this is all we want to do. We just want to swap the value of fract1 and fract2. So now let's go ahead and take a look at this in Paint so that we can understand this a little bit better. So here is just our generic swap function. It has a void star A, void star B, and a size as their parameters. So we passed through fract1 and fract2. So fract1 is 3/4 and fract2 is 1/2. And then the size of a fraction is obviously just 8. So all that we want to do right here is we just want to swap the value of fract1 with fract2. Well, let's just go back and take a look at what we did when we were just swapping integers to see where we should start with writing this generic swap function. So back here, the first thing that we did is we just created a temporary variable to store the contents of num1 in. So first, let's just go ahead and focus on creating this variable. We'll just do this first step right here. That's what we want to do right now. So let's go back to this generic swap function. So we'll just say void star temp equals A. That should work fine, right? Well, actually it won't, because all this is going to do right here is it's just going to take the address stored in this generic pointer and copying it into the temporary variable called temp. So now all that we've got here is temp is just pointing to fract1, and that's not helpful at all. So what we actually need to do is allocate enough memory to store our temporary variable in. So we're going to say void star temp equals malloc, and then we know the size of each one of these things since we had to pass that in as a parameter. So we want to allocate enough memory for each one of these things. Alright, so all that we did right here is we just allocated 8 bytes of memory, and it's now pointed to by temp. So let's just go ahead and add that to our picture. So we're going to say right here we just allocated some temporary memory, so 8 bytes of memory since we just passed in a fraction. So we just allocated 8 bytes of memory right here, and it's pointed to by a variable called temp. So temp, and I'll just make this black. Alright, and right now we have no idea what the value of all this memory is. It could be anything, so I'll just put question marks for right now. Okay, so back to our number example. After we allocated the memory for temp, the next thing that we did is we copied the value in num1 over to that temporary memory. So what we're going to do right now is we're just going to use memcopy to copy the memory from fract1 into the temporary memory right here. So we're going to go back to our code, and we're just going to say memcopy, memcpy, and the first parameter is just going to be the destination. So where do we want to copy the memory to? We want to copy the memory to our temporary variable right here, so temp. And then we want to copy the memory from this address right here, so the address stored in the first parameter. So A, and then how much memory do we want to copy? We want to copy size memory, so size amount of memory. So after this line right here is executed, it's just going to copy the memory pointed to by the first parameter into the memory pointed to by temp. So we'll just add that to our picture. So let me just go ahead and erase all these question marks right here because we now know the value of all this memory. So like I said, it's just going to copy the value from fract1 into temp. So byte by byte, it's just going to copy the memory in fract1 to temp. So 0, 0, 0, 3, 0, 0, 0, 4. So now for the next step, let's just go back to our integer example to see what to do next. So after we copy the value from num1 into the temporary memory, the next thing that we do is copy the value of num2 into num1. So what we want to do now is just copy the value from fract2 into fract1. So let's just go back to our code and do that. So we're going to be copying our memory from B to A. So memcopy. Our destination is going to be A, our source is B, and we want to copy size memory. So now that we copied the value from B to A, let's just go back and update our picture. So we copied the value from B, which is just fract2, into A. So now instead of there being a 3 and a 4 right here, there's a 1 and a 2. So 1 and a 2. All we did is we just copied the memory from fract2 into the memory pointed to by fract1. For the final step, let's just go back and look at our original example to see what we have to do. So we go back and look at our integer example, and we see that we copy the value from temp into num2. So that's exactly what we're going to do. We're just going to copy all of the memory pointed to by temp into the memory pointed to by our second parameter b right here. So let's just go back to our code and do that. So we're going to say memcopy, our destination is going to be b, our source is temp, and we want to copy size amount of memory. So let's just go back and update our picture for the last time. So we copied the value from temp into fract2. So we're going to go back here and replace this 1 and 2 with a 3 and a 4. So 3 and a 4. And that's it. You successfully just swapped the value of these two fractions. But lastly, in our function right here, we'll just go ahead and free the temporary memory that we allocated. And you really should free memory anytime that you allocate it using malloc. So now that we've finally written our generic function, let's just go ahead and test it out. So we're going to say printf before, and we'll say fract1 equals mod I over mod I, so numerator on top, denominator on bottom, and then fract2 will just equal, again, numerator over denominator, and the line, so fract1 dot num fract1 dot denom, and then the same thing for fract2, so fract2 dot num fract2 dot denom. And then we'll just go ahead and print out the exact same thing for after. Okay, so let's just go ahead and run this. So before, fract1 should equal 1/2, and fract2 should be 3/4. After, fract1 should be 3/4, and fract2 should be 1/2. So let's just run this and make sure that it works. And it did. As you can see, it just swapped the values. And let's just test it with a different data type to make sure that it works entirely. So instead of generic swapping two fractions, we'll just go ahead and generic swap two characters. So we'll say char c1 equals capital A and char c2 equals capital B. And then again, we just need to do a before and after, so printf, we'll say before, and then instead of labeling them this time, I'll just put them in the correct order. So the first one will just be C1 and the second one will be C2 in both instances of me printing this out. So printf first time, printf the second time. Alright, so like I said before, this character is C1, the second character is C2. Oh no. Oh, I just had to pass through the characters this time. So we're passing through C1 and C2, and then we just need to pass through the size of the character. So size of a car. Alright, and there we go. So before AB and after was BA. I just forgot the new line. But anyways, that's it for this tutorial on the generic swap, so see you guys.